Welcome to War Cradle Studios. I'm Lee and with me is Stuart.
Hello!
And we're here today because we have a very important announcement about future plans coming from War Cradle Studios.
It is really important, but it's also really exciting.
It is, it really is. It's one of those secrets we've been holding on to for a little while now that we can finally share with you.
Yeah, it was really important. We have these plans in development, but it was really important to try and get as much to show you. So we're not just telling you, we're showing you. And so what we're going to be able to do is to start to show you some things, but we'll talk about those and show them off in a little bit. So what we want to talk about is the dystopian age. What the dystopian age is, it's an overall setting for all of our Victorian, super science, 19th century science fiction games that we either have out already or that we're working on and they're in development.
So there's a couple of things that we need to talk about in that case. First off, what does the dystopian age mean for dystopian wars? And what that means is we now have a larger unified canvas which we can explore all parts of dystopian wars and the world in which that inhabits. We can get into a lot more detail with the various factions and the people and the technology that each of these factions have. Yeah,
it's really important. Humanity is at the heart of the dystopian age. So yes, there are other forces at work. Either some of them are extraterrestrial, some of them are of our own creation. But whatever these other forces are, it's humans, it's men and women of the earth, and how they take that, either that power or that information or that opportunity, and what it does to them, and how they have then spun the planet in a very, very different direction to how our 19th century has gone. So it's an age of incredible science, incredible technologies, but also everything's heightened. Heroism is heightened, greed and ambition is heightened. The plans, the machinations of the various nations of the earth with these incredible powers at their fingertips have spun the planet in and spun the world onto the brink of an abomination of a war that will devastate everybody. At the moment, it's in flashpoints all over the planet. It's in key narratives and things that are kind of exploring it, but it is literally a hair's breadth away from it being a chain reaction which can consume the entire world. But it's also an optimistic setting, with everything being as dark and terrible and on the brink of extinction that we are. Fundamentally, all of the factions involved believe that if they can get control, if they can get their interests served, they can bring the rest of humanity into a new golden age. So take it out of a dystopian age into a golden age. But unfortunately, there can be only one, as it were, and each one of those factions in that world think that it should be them, and obviously therein lies the conflict in the setting.
Yeah, so if you're familiar with dystopian wars, there is an awful lot of which will now be familiar from the dystopian age.
Yes.
A lot of the background that existed for dystopian wars has been integrated into the dystopian age, but there's a few more twists and surprises for us to show you as we go along.
That's right. It is a new setting. So while it is from the dystopian wars point of view, and we'll talk specifically about dystopian wars in a moment, but from dystopian wars point of view, it is a relaunch, a reboot, for want of a better word. But so much of that rich background is being, hopefully fairly skillfully, we've got some good people on it, interwoven into a much larger narrative with other elements being integrated as well, that for even long-term fans of dystopian wars, there should be some interesting spins, some alternate takes on stuff that they thought that they knew. It is a new world, it is a new take on the dystopian age. One of the other games that is part of the dystopian age is one that we've had for a while in our stable, which is Wild West Exodus. So Wild West Exodus is part of that greater world. How that works is quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned when we were talking about Wild West Exodus that we wanted to expand the world out. So Wild West Exodus is very much focusing on what happens in the American frontier, and a lot of the factions that appear in Wild West Exodus aren't necessarily going to appear in other games in the dystopian age. There's a couple that will, but most of them won't.
Yeah.
So what this allows us to do is a lot of that world building is already done for us because we've integrated the Dystopian Wars background into the Wild West Exodus world. So you're going to be seeing a lot of crossover between the two games, the entire world.
Yeah, I mean, what we've taken is essentially we've taken two rich narratives and they connect together really quite nicely. There are a few differences, and that's why, as I say, there might be some surprises and some new takes on old favourites for fans of both settings. For the fans of Wild West Exodus, obviously there's this entire wider world out there that the Dystopian Age is now going to fill in the gaps for you. So yes, there is the Union of Federated American States, which is the home of where Wild West Exodus takes place. But what goes beyond, and what does the Union look like when it isn't doing the National Guard bit on home soil? What's it doing when it's out there elsewhere in the world? All these other flashpoints, all these other nations. When the Union, rather than in Exodus, where the Union is the preeminent military power and everybody else is kind of more of a ragtag band, they're moving into the wider dystopian age where you've got empires that have been doing the empiring, the state building game for hundreds, if not thousands of years, where the new emerging union with its great ideas and its sense of destiny and predetermined future, how that fits into it all. So it's going to be a really, really interesting setting for both for fans of both of the games.
So let's take a look at some of the games that will be coming out for the dystopian age. The first one we're going to talk about is, of course, Dystopian Wars, which is a 1 to 1200 scale naval battles game. Now, in Dystopian Wars, you have fleets of sea vessels, which comprise of battleships, frigates, gunboats, those sort of things, as well as some flying units as support. And it's pretty much recognisable from what Dystopian Wars players understand at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. So the feel for Dystopian Wars is very much about naval combat. So you're going to have fantastic fleets, battle groups centred around these large vessels like carriers, battleships, and all sorts of weird and wonderful things that the various factions bring. You have the huge robots. You're going to have weird and wonderful sky fortresses coming through the air. All sorts of. It's a really exciting. And what Dystopian Wars represents is, I mentioned about how the world is so close to all out conflict. At the moment, though, the nations realise that an all-out war is going to be so devastating, particularly with the technology that they all have at their fingertips, that almost no one will win. Well, obviously, in the back of their mind, they think that they're going to win, but overall, no one wins. It's going to be devastating. The Earth will be a charred cinder. However, in the open seas, that's a place where all the empires can kind of show their muscles and
let rip without very little collateral damage.
Because all you're doing is you're not obliterating towns and cities. You're just sinking the enemy's fleets and trying to seize the enemy's assets and things on the open sea. So, Dystopian Wars is the might of nations, these mighty empires, unchained. So they're just going all out against each other. They can engage each other, and to be honest, because the way communication is out there on the high seas, it's not an age where everybody's got cell phones and things around. Two fleets can engage, and really, who knows what happens? So fleets disappear out in the seas, ships go missing, and so on. So there's an opportunity for the nations to further their aims, sometimes secretly, even though they're using these massive fleets to do it. It's away from prying eyes. It's out there in the vast expanse of the oceans of the world. So who knows what's going on out there? And that's what this game is going to show you. It's going to be about doing that, about seeing these empires in action, which is very, very cool.
Now, as part of our work on Dystopian Wars, we are already designing a host of new miniatures for the game, and we've got a couple that we can share with you now.
Yes, the great thing that we can see here, so we've got 3 battleships that we can show you. So we have for the Crown, we have the Britannia class battleship, which is a fantastic looking, bristling with guns. For the Union, and we have the model here on the table as well, we have the Constitution class battleship.
It's a beast.
It's a beast
with some very large turret guns.
Absolutely. And then finally, you can see the Celestial Ninjing class battleship. Now, all of them are echoing not just some of the design lines that you may be familiar with for existing Dystopian Wars players, but they are bringing some new aesthetics into it as well. The intention, though, is that within the range there'll be lots of miniatures. Many of them are going to be very, very familiar to existing players of Dystopian Wars, but others of them are going to be significantly updated and reworked. And over the coming months, we're going to be able to show you some more of that, as well as give you a lot more background on all of the factions in Dystopian Wars.
So the second game that we want to talk about is Armoured Clash. Now, Armoured Clash is a 10mm game. It's a new scale for this, which translates as 1 to 160.
Yep.
It's a game of land battles which is set in the continent of Africa, where the main factions which already exist in Dystopian Wars, they will be coming over to Armoured Clash. They will be fighting each other on the many varied types of terrain and lands that you can find in Africa.
That's right. So I mean, Africa, certainly in the dystopian age, but Africa in general, it's not just deserts and things. I mean, that's more of a stereotype. It is a very rich and varied landscape, as rich and varied as anywhere else on the earth. So what you'll have there, you have the major powers, and so I mentioned how the open seas are a place where they can fight in kind of unrestrained fury. A place that they can... A land war in Europe is absolutely not what the powers in the dystopian age want. However, Africa, which is pretty much a series or a chain of colonies, Africa's a rich place for the various nations to battle and try and seize territory, and that's essentially what Armoured Clash captures. It's the military might, the land forces, with some aerial support as well. So there are air units in Armoured Clash as well, battling against each other in trying to seize critical assets across the continent. The idea being that a nation that gains enough of Africa gains a huge advantage over the other nations, and again, that should then mean that they can dictate the terms of the future for the dystopian age over the other nations. So really rich, really interesting, fantastic miniatures. Again, we're developing a whole host of new miniatures. We've got some of them here, but we can show. So if we first of all we look at this one. So this is the Crown. This is the Cromwell class main battle tank for the Crown. Then Lee, you have the Rolling Thunder, which a design of that is very familiar to players of Wild West Exodus. So the Rolling Thunder, which is the medium battle tank for the Union. And then also we have a handy dandy utility vehicle, which is the Ironhide, which is used by many of the nations. It's a kind of a common transport vehicle that many of the nations use. There is a whole host of miniatures coming out for the game, though. Really, really fantastic stuff. The studio is working very hard on sculpting lots of new miniatures. Now, this is a key difference, though. So previously, the scale for the land game was different in Dystopian Wars. Okay, so we have got a new scale for the game. It's something that we feel really strongly about. We think it will make for a much more interesting series of battles. So your tanks are more recognisable to being tank-sized rather than warehouse-sized and these vast things that potentially they could be. What we're doing though is because we're really keen to make sure that people don't just have a load of land models that they now can't use. That would be rubbish. We're gamers. We don't want to have that to people. So where possible, you'll find a lot of the new miniatures coming out for Armoured Clash are very much going to be similar to existing miniatures from the Dystopian Wars land game, but reworked, up-detailed, and obviously some scaling, things like ladders and hatches and things. So the scale is more apparent for the miniature, but there is absolutely nothing to stop you, and we're going to make sure that there's a handy downloadable PDF so you can reference it. There'll be nothing to stop you from using some of your existing miniatures, your existing land-based miniatures in Armoured Clash going forward. So we'll make sure, so the super heavy land ships are going to be very similar. The medium tanks, the heavy tanks, we'll have a really handy guide so you can tell exactly what in your collection and what it is in Armoured Clash, so you can get playing straight away.
And also, when we do our public beta, we will want you to be able to play the game, which will mean using your existing miniatures. So that's another reason why we want you to not just be throwing away your old miniatures, but keep them and love them and use them.
It's the last thing we want to do. The reason we've worked so hard, and we're continuing to work really hard on Armoured Clash, it's a new scale, it's a new game engine as well, is to make sure that there is as vibrant and broad a canvas for people to collect some really fantastic looking miniatures. And it means that we can go even further with things, so that we can make even larger types of land ships. We can have fantastic sized robots and all the other great things that we could do in Dystopian Wars, but really, because of the scale, they wouldn't necessarily have quite the same effect now in Armoured Clash. Now, when you play Armoured Clash, you're going to really get a sense of the gigantic proportions of some of these large robots and other fighting machines and things. So we believe it's going to be a really exciting setting for the dystopian age. And again, some of the miniatures and some of the detail that we can get in because of the scale change means that they're going to be really fantastic, and it'll tie in with terrain so much more easily as well, because 10mm is quite a common terrain scale for people to have.
Yeah. Even if you went to a model shop and went for some N-scale railway tracks,
that's right, yeah.
it fits perfectly. And because 10mm is such a common scale within the industry, you should easily be able to find some terrain which will fit our miniatures.
So very, very exciting. We're going to be talking lots more about Armoured Clash going forward. There's lots more to reveal on it, but as I say, we thought it was important to kind of show you some of what we were planning, and say some of these great looking miniatures. It's worth mentioning. So one of the things in Dystopian Wars that people like to do was to fight land battles where they were moving from the sea and they were doing like coastal assaults and things. That's still going to be part of Dystopian Wars. So there'll still be landing craft because it's scaled in with Dystopian Wars, but we will have some Dystopian War scale tanks and things to put on them, so they're going to look really great. But also there will be a whole host of coastal defences and other material, so that you can still fight those kind of games. We want to make sure that there are scenarios and other material you can still fight the landing battle, as it were. The difference will be, though, is that what you're now able to do, and this is what I find really exciting, is as part of a larger narrative campaign, you could play a game of Dystopian Wars, where you begin the early stages of the assault, and then you get your landing craft. You can then play a game of Armoured Clash, and that's where you can battle over, once you pass the beach and you're then moving on to the land itself. So a great game of Armoured Clash, which represents then some of these landing assets that you brought in. And then finally, when you get into things like the bunkers and things, well, that's when you can then move to the 35mm games. The main one that you'll be familiar with is Wild West Exodus. But we have other things in the pipe later on, but we'll talk about those another time.
So as far as Wild West Exodus goes, because we are now fitting Wild West Exodus into the dystopian age, our plans for Wild West Exodus are going to have to slightly be amended. This means that the Crown and the Celestials, who we had planned to be full factions in Wild West Exodus, are now going to be moved to other games.
Yes, so what it means is, and this is really important, it means that, so you have, in Wild West Exodus, you have, units have multiple factions that they can belong to, okay? That's obviously still continuing to be the case, but what it actually means is that we can have all of these other factions. So you could have an allegiance to the Prussian Imperium, for example, and all these other factions that you can have, so the Crown, the Celestials, you can have these other allegiances, and at some point, we may very well have some exciting news about that scale of game. There will be a logical tie-in to there. So narratively, Wild West Exodus is absolutely about the battles of the American frontier, but it's not in isolation anymore. We're not just focusing on that. We are going to have these little links. Think characters like Nimue, who have these links to these other powers, these other factions, these other empires that are beyond the borders of America. And we're hinting at that, but we will absolutely be exploring that at some point in the future. But we'll cover that in a separate video later on.
Yeah, but as far as Wild West Exodus goes, that is the only major change that we're considering. All of the plans that we had for posses and for expansions coming out in the years to come, we are still dedicated to those, and that will be happening.
Yeah, what it means is, though, that you now have some context as to where your games are taking place in this larger dystopian age. Yeah, I say very exciting. I think it's very exciting for Dystopian Wars, and it's very, very exciting for people, fans of the land game with Armoured Clash. And as I say, now you can see with Wild West Exodus, they all connect together into this larger setting, and we'll be going into much more detail about the setting. One of the stylistic concerns I know that some people have had, just briefly talk about it, is that you look at Wild West Exodus, and because of the very tight narrative of the game, and because of where it's set, and that it's very, very deep on some relatively, in the grand scheme of things, relatively small factions, the more unusual, the more weird and wonderful, the more supernatural, for want of a better word, elements are more prevalent in Wild West Exodus. And there's a concern that's the overall tone of the dystopian age. It isn't. There are, when you read into the background of Wild West Exodus, there are reasons, scientific and pseudo-scientific reasons as to why a lot of these things are happening out there. We're going to go into much more detail explaining why from the various factions. So the Warrior Nation, with their spirit power and all the other bits and pieces, that is absolutely how they see it. But the more educated powers out there, peering down their nose at these kind of shape-shifting creatures,
Savages.
yeah, they will have an explanation. There'll be a very thick book explaining just how all that possibly works, that's stored somewhere in the Crown's great libraries or something. So we're going to play up that as well. We're going to explore the scientific explanation as to why and how these things happen.
The rational, civilized reason for why these things are happening.
Yes, because for it to be anything else, that way lies madness.
Yes, and anarchy.
so we're very much so more of the genre of Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll, and that's the kind of thing, the Invisible Man, that kind of pulp sciencey type world. That's the world of the dystopian age. That's the world that Wild West Exodus does exist in, that Dystopian Wars exists in, and Armoured Clash. 3 games in one setting. And that is just the beginning for the dystopian age. There's some really, really exciting stuff. If this wasn't exciting enough, really exciting stuff to come. And once you've digested all of this, we'd love to take your questions on it.
Yes, well, next Friday, which is Friday the 8th of December at 7 p.m. GMT, we will be having a Dystopian Age Q&A. There will be an event page which will be set up on Facebook, the War Cradle page. If you have any questions, please get them on there as soon as possible. We can give you a more articulate, more thorough answer if we know what you're going to ask ahead of time. We will still take questions during the live stream if we've got time, but by far, if you want to know something, give us plenty of notice so that we can prepare an answer which will satisfy you as much as possible.
Yeah, we're really keen to share as much of the information as we can. Rest assured, we're going to have blog articles, we're going to have more videos, loads more shots of miniatures and all sorts of things to come. That's all going to come down the line as we start to develop, and we're able to show you more.
This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, it's not an iceberg.
No, we'll go straight through an iceberg, but this is just the tip of the iceberg of the things we have ready to show, but which we can't show you just yet.
Yeah, and for those, there are some wonderful sculpts already in the Dystopian Wars setting. We're going to be looking to bring those into it as well. So there's a whole host of stuff to come. I'm very excited about it. I think it's a really exciting time for fans of the games we've mentioned, and also for what we're going to be bringing along as well. And we look forward to taking your questions and telling you more.
So we will see you then. Goodbye.